A game needs three things to win Game of the Year: popularity, quality, and innovation. Let's look at each of the three and see if an indie game could accomplish the necessary numbers to win the award. An argument you've likely seen more times than you can count is that Game of the Year is just a popularity contest, and it's true. Kind of. See, pure popularity alone won't win you Game of the Year. Don't believe me? Well, let's look at the numbers. In 2019, the Game of the Year winner was Sekiro with about 4 million year one sales. In comparison, Resident Evil 2 sold just under 6 million, Kingdom Hearts 3 sold 5 million, and Borderlands 3 sold the same amount in just 5 days. You could do this with every year. God of War was outsold by Red Dead, It Takes Two was outsold by Resident Evil, and The Last of Us 2 was outsold by... What the f? You get the point. Granted, sales aren't the sole determining factor on how popular a game is, but they do give us a pretty solid idea, and based on that idea, the most popular game doesn't really win that often. However, popularity to a certain degree is absolutely necessary. In the 8 years that the Game Awards have been running, never once has a game under 1 million sales won the award, and only one time has there been a winner under 3 million. In fact, if you average out the numbers and exclude the outliers like Elden Ring and God of War with well over 20 million, you'd get an average of about 5 million sales necessary to win Game of the Year. So while popularity isn't the be-all end-all when it comes to the Game Awards, you do need it to at least get through the doors. So could an indie game reach that level of popularity? Yeah, probably. Indie games today are bigger than they've ever been, and that trend of growth is only continuing with each passing year. Recently, Cuphead sold over 1 million copies in just the first 2 weeks, and Hollow Knight sold about 3 million in its first 2 years. Now, these numbers are gonna have to go up a bit since you need to reach them in a year, not 2, but it's totally realistic to expect some of the sequels to these games like Hades 2 or Hollow Knight Silksong to not just surpass their predecessors in sales, but exceed the necessary popularity to win the award, meaning that, statistically speaking, an indie game in the future could become well known enough within the allotted time to win Game of the Year. The next box we need to check is quality. This is significantly harder to measure, as not only is it far more subjective, but it's also going to vary depending on the sources you look at. One website might tell you they've never seen anything like Tears of the Kingdom before, while the next could say they hope to never see anything like it again. This will result in wildly different review scores, but there are some places we can go to get a slightly more objective metric on a game's quality. So I've compiled a list of the winners' scores on OpenCritic and Metacritic, but as you'll pretty quickly see, the scores on both websites are practically the same. What you really want to focus on here is the bare minimum. What is the lowest rated game that's won Game of the Year, and what are the averages? In knowing these two metrics, we can figure out if an indie can meet those standards. First, we've got the lowest, which is Dragon Age from 2014 at 85 on Metacritic and 88 on OpenCritic. This, however, just like people who are subscribed, might be a bit of an outlier considering it's the first Game of the Year. So let's look at the average, which is about 92 on both Metacritic and OpenCritic. Considering most games fall either at or above 90, I think setting that as the barrier to entry is a safe bet, and once again, that's an easy bar for some of the best indies to clear. Hollow Knight, Celeste, Hades, and even more recently Chained Echoes are all at or well above the necessary 90 needed to win Game of the Year. So once again, statistically speaking, an indie could do it, but the last one might be the greatest challenge of all to overcome, and it's practically impossible to define with objective statistics and metrics. The last thing a game needs is innovation. Practically every Game of the Year winner has been innovative in some way, whether that's redefining what an open world can be or changing how we view parry-based combat in games. Indies are in a particularly good spot for this though, as they create some of the most innovative experiences I've ever seen. I mean, there's one game called Before Your Eyes that literally takes advantage of your ability to blink and uses it to tell a brilliant and heart-wrenching story about the human experience and what it means to be alive. Crazy, I know. 12 Minutes takes advantage of time loops by resetting the entire game every 12 minutes, hence the title. This is yet another brilliantly unique way to design a game that we rarely see. Lastly, you've got my personal favorite, Outer Wilds, a game so good that after playing it, my outlook on my day-to-day life had to change because of the lessons that this game taught me. I've never played anything like it since, and I genuinely wonder if I'll ever play anything like it again. I can't even really talk about it since a large part of what makes Outer Wilds special are those surprises and revelations throughout the game. You see, certain indies are redefining what it even means to be a video game, and they're really pushing this medium to places that I never predicted it would or even could go. So that all raises one pretty big question, right? If indies can statistically win Game of the Year, and they have what it takes in terms of innovation, why hasn't an indie won Game of the Year yet? Well, I've got two theories, and with them we'll finally be able to answer the question of not just can an indie win Game of the Year, but will it? So there are two big reasons an indie hasn't won Game of the Year yet. Number one, they're not big enough. I briefly mentioned this earlier, but indies are still actively growing. We'll soon reach a point where they can hit those numbers necessary for Game of the Year, but they're not quite there yet. The second reason is a bit more complicated, but I'm willing to bet that it'll also likely fade with time. As of right now, there are just more games that can fulfill all the necessary requirements in the AAA category than there are in the indie category. Indies that sell over 1 million are not common, but in the AAA scene, that's something that happens multiple times over with practically every big release. So statistically speaking, an indie game could win. But does that actually matter? I mean, out of all the game awards, my personal Game of the Year has only won the actual award one time, and I'm sure the results are similar for you. In spite of that, however, we still loved these games. Their impact on us remains entirely unchanged by the accolades that they do or do not receive, because what makes a true Game of the Year is not whether or not it wins some award, but whether or not it was special to you. So can an indie game win Game of the Year? Yeah, probably. But does it actually matter? Absolutely not.